Beaufort Borger AM. Everything began with a chilling warning signal echoing across the radio frequency, sharp as a blade of steel. Two Russian Su-24s skimmed the bow like steel phantoms, while a destroyer surged forward against the waves toward the USS Thomas Hudner at 28.4 knots, a predator poised to strike. Above, four Su-30SMs armed with Mach 3 anti-ship missiles roared into the sky, tearing through the icy mist. Inside the command deck, one question weighed heavily on every nerve of the crew. What would happen if Russia opened fire on a $13.3 billion American warship in these frozen seas? Yet the true threat lay beneath the frigid waves. A Kilo-class submarine rumbled forward, its sonar pulsing at 12 dBV, deliberately exposing itself like a challenge. Can you imagine it? That echo pounding like a war drum straight into the sailors' ears. On the surface, Russian radar locked onto the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most powerful and expensive symbol in naval history. The sky instantly shifted into a battlefield of steel. Within the next 60 minutes, 48 American fighters would launch one after another from the deck. Is this a display of absolute power, or the harbinger of a bloodstorm about to engulf the ocean? And then, the US struck back without a single explosion. EA-18G Growlers immediately blinded Russia's entire radar network, while a Virginia-class submarine suddenly surfaced just 6.2 nautical miles away, tearing apart the enemy's anti-submarine defenses. It was a display of invisible dominance, forcing the Russian fleet into a silent retreat. In the end, Moscow could do nothing but conceal the truth from its own navy. Leave a like if you love the United States military. The Barents Sea, seemingly calm, concealed a hidden blade. At 0714, USS Thomas Hudner cut through 14-foot waves beneath the gray Arctic sky, escorting the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group on a freedom of navigation patrol. But just 2 minutes later, the SPY-6 radar detected an unusual acceleration signal from the Russian direction, the opening move in what would become the year's most tense confrontation. The moment the radar signal flared, a classified order was transmitted from Moscow. Block the Americans, force them to withdraw, and prove Russia's dominance in the northern seas. Yet it seemed Russia had chosen the wrong adversary. Confronting them was not a lone destroyer, but 148,000 tons of American sovereignty afloat, the USS Gerald R. Ford. Accompanied by 4 destroyers and 2 nuclear submarines, it commanded every nautical mile within a 300-mile radius. The USS Gerald R. Ford is not merely an aircraft carrier. It is a declaration forged in steel. On its deck sit more than 75 combat aircraft, while 4 guided missile destroyers and 2 nuclear submarines guard its flanks. Every meter of water around it is under constant surveillance. The adversary may believe they hold the initiative, but in reality, they are merely acting out a script written by the United States, with every outcome calculated down to the very second. And then Russia struck first. At 0721, 4 Su-30SM fighters poured into the sky from Virginia Air Base, armed with KH-31P anti-radar missiles and KH-35U Mach 3 anti-ship missiles. In just 12 minutes, they would breach the 25 nautical mile defense perimeter of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most sensitive zone in NATO's entire Arctic defense doctrine. Yet this was only the visible tip of Moscow's hidden strategy. Next, the fire control radar of the Admiral Levchenko suddenly locked onto the USS Gerald R. Ford, sending an unspoken message: "We are ready to open fire on your flagship." The air grew heavy, thick with tension. At the same moment, the sonar of USS Thomas Hudner picked up a Kilo-class submarine 28,000 yards away, creeping beneath the thermocline. Yet it was far too noisy to hide, as if raising a challenge flag from the very depths of the frozen sea.
Dotted with advantages against their enemies.
Now, Russia was operating simultaneously on three fronts: in the air, on the surface, and beneath the sea. Yet this was not the execution of a flawless strategy. It was chaos wearing the mask of coordination. Su-30SM fighters skimmed the decks of U.S. warships at just 200 feet, their passes so low that antennas shuddered violently, while their fuel reserves ran dangerously low. Even so, American commanders held to iron discipline. No counterstrike, only observation, waiting for the precise moment to unleash a decisive blow. The United States is never driven by fear. It acts only when strategy demands a decisive strike. Russia is charging headlong toward a red line, where a single misstep will unleash irreversible consequences. At 0734, the most urgent order thundered across the deck: launch the entire air wing. Instantly, the flight deck of USS Gerald R. Ford erupted like a steel volcano, igniting a show of force unprecedented in the frozen waters of the Arctic. Four FA-18E Super Hornets launched one after another, each separated by exactly 47 seconds, armed with AIM-120D missiles, AIM-9X Sidewinders, and 2,000-pound precision-guided bombs. Yet they did not fire. This was not an attack. It was a declaration of absolute readiness. High above, an E-2D Hawkeye swept the frozen skies with its Anapy-9 radar, tracking up to 2,500 targets simultaneously. Every ripple in the electromagnetic spectrum, every faint signature was firmly within America's grasp. Meanwhile, two EA-18G Growlers unleashed their ALQ-249 jamming pods, flooding Russian radar screens with a storm of false echoes. In less than 30 seconds, 4 American aircraft multiplied into 12, then 20 phantom targets. The Su-30SM pilots were left groping in the dark, relying only on radio chatter and strained eyesight. In contrast, the U.S. Super Hornets could track 20 contacts at once, strike 6 simultaneously, and share targeting data across the entire fleet in real time. The technological gap was brutally clear. Russia still relied on old mechanical radars, sweeping sluggishly like World War II searchlights. At 0741, a Russian fighter drifted into firing range and an AIM-120D was primed to launch. Yet America held its fire because the real strike was already unfolding beneath the waves, where a Virginia-class submarine was silently closing in and locking onto its target. But beneath the cold black water, the balance of power had already swung decisively to the United States. A Virginia-class submarine, silent for 8 days straight, slipped into position just 5.8 nautical miles from the Russian destroyer. It had shadowed the Kilo class from the outset, recording every ping, every course change, every datum etched into its sonar log. If war broke out, the Kilo would be erased in 12 seconds. The Admiral Levchenko would vanish within 40. This was no longer deterrence. It was a blade pressed to the enemy's throat.
Non-stop flight from Chita to Kaliningrad, for example.
Pushed to the brink, Russia grew ever more reckless. At 0746, a nearly fuel-starved Su-30SM suddenly dove straight at an American FA-18E in a deliberate thump of provocation. But this was not Syrian airspace. The US pilot, Top Gun trained, immediately reversed, pulled 6.5G, tailed the Su-30 for 2.7 seconds, and locked a flawless target. A single squeeze of the trigger would have ended it, yet American fire discipline held firm. Wait for the order, do not act rashly. At the same moment, on the ocean floor, the Kilo class made a fatal error. It raised its snorkel to recharge. Within seconds, the sonar of USS Thomas Hudner had it locked down to within a 14-meter radius. Designated a Project 877, operating at 118 FT depth and moving at 3 knots, it had no idea it had been shadowed for over an hour. In a combat scenario, a single VLAVL ASROC would turn that hulk into wreckage in 14 seconds. But the boldest approach came from the surface. At 0749, Admiral Levchenko cut the sweep and trained a beam of fire directly on the USS Gerald R. Ford, an act akin to pressing a gun to the opponent's temple. Ford's command center immediately triggered warning protocols. The top-level order was clear: do not fire unless fired upon. Rather than open with rounds, the entire strike group quietly finalized their kill solutions, waiting for the moment they would be authorized to turn threat into action. This was the most dangerous gamble in modern naval history, and America won, forcing its adversary to back down. At 1432, the skies over the North Atlantic erupted with power. In less than 4 minutes, USS Gerald R. Ford launched 48 combat aircraft, the largest deployment in the Arctic since the Cold War. The air grew thick with the stench of jet fuel, while the roar of engines thundered like rolling storms across the frozen sea.